In this video, we're going to discuss insurance policy analysis. This comes from Chapter 7 of the CPCU 500 text. Much of what we discuss in this video lecture is going to be review from Principles of Insurance, or ARMIN 2005 at ULM. But we'll go a little more in depth into the insurance policy analysis concepts. So let's start with characteristics of insurance policies, which will be the longest section of this lecture. We'll talk about indemnity, utmost good faith, fortuitous losses, non-transferable contracts, contract of adhesion, exchange of unequal amounts, and conditional contracts. All of these were concepts we discussed in ARMIN 2005. So let's start with indemnity. Remember that indemnity is financial restoration. Indemnity means restoring the insured to the same financial position they were in before the loss, after the loss. Some policies do not adhere to the principle of indemnity. For example, valued policies. If a policy has a face amount assigned to the policy as a value, that is the amount paid once a loss has occurred, regardless of the actual value of the loss when it occurs. This is the case with life insurance and many valued policies associated with antiques and arts. But insurance should generally not over-indemnify. If it did, it would create a moral hazard problem, where individuals who were insured would tend to cause losses just to make money on the insurance. And insurance should not indemnify insureds more than once per loss. This is why many insurance contracts have other insurance provisions, or as we discussed in ARMIN 205, subrogation provisions, which say that when the insured collects from a loss under one policy, the insurance company stands in the position of the insured in collecting from another policy. This is very common in liability situations, where the insured can collect under their property policy, and then their insurance company can in turn collect from the liable party's insurance policy. There's also the collateral source rule, which says that an insured's indemnification should not be reduced because there are more than one policy that covers the same loss. So if an insured collects from their property policy, let's say they collect $10,000 for a loss, but their loss is actually $10,500, they first have to pay a deductible. When their own insurance company subrogates against the liable party's policy, the insured should get $500 from the subrogation. They should not suffer because both policies covered the same loss. Now let's look at utmost good faith. In order to discuss the concept of utmost good faith, we have to look at two other concepts: information asymmetries and adverse selection. In general, insureds know more about their own risk than the insurer does. This causes information asymmetry, which is basically one party having more information than the other. When an insured knows more about their own risk than the insurer does, this creates a potential adverse selection problem. Remember that adverse selection is the tendency of people with riskier exposures to buy more insurance than the average exposure. In order to prevent adverse selection, an insurer must collect information to combat it, i.e., they must underwrite. The more information they collect from the insured, the more they know about the risk associated with that exposure. Collecting information, though, is costly, so the insurer has to rely to some extent on the insured for information. It can be extremely costly to even verify the information that the insured provides, so this creates a need for utmost good faith. Utmost good faith is an obligation to act with complete honesty and disclose all relevant facts. This is from CPCU, page 7.5. This is the idea that when the insurer collects information, they have to believe that the insured is giving them accurate information about the exposure. If not, this would be a misrepresentation on the part of the insured, and it could potentially void the contract. Also, losses that are covered under an insurance contract must be fortuitous. A quote from CPCU 7.6, "If an insured knows in advance a loss will occur and the insurer does not, the insured has an information advantage over the insurer." Again, we have an information asymmetry problem, which is a huge adverse selection problem. Think about life insurance. This would be common if an insured could go buy a life insurance policy knowing that they're about to take their own life. This is why life insurance policies exclude payment for losses that are caused by suicide within 1 or 2 years after policy inception. Also, in property, think about intentionally caused losses, which are excluded. For example, someone might take out an insurance policy right before they burn their own property down. This is also a moral and morale hazard problem because insureds are more able to cause a loss or not prevent losses that are in their control. Fortuitous losses are accidental and not, therefore, in their control. An insurance policy is also a contract of adhesion. Insurance contracts are developed by the insurer or an insurance organization like ISO or ISO. They are standard and therefore not negotiated, and they are then adhered to by the insured. So that's where we get the term contract of adhesion. You can add endorsements, but those are created by the insurer as well. When insurance companies construct a contract, they are constructed with acceptable ambiguities. It is almost impossible to write a contract that doesn't have some ambiguity or something that is unclear. If more than one interpretation can be found in a contract, courts will find in favor of the insured. This is because the insurer has the opportunity to make sure there are only some acceptable ambiguities in the contract, but it depends on the sophistication of the insured. This relates to the reasonable expectations doctrine, which is an extension of the contract of adhesion. It is a legal doctrine that provides that if a clause is ambiguous, it should be interpreted in a way a reasonable insured would expect. A more sophisticated insured, in terms of that particular exposure, might be more likely to interpret the contract the way the insurer actually intended. Most insureds, however, are not well versed in policy interpretation. In other words, they would not be considered sophisticated with respect to insurance coverage. Therefore, most of the time, any ambiguity in an insurance contract is interpreted in favor of the insured. It is incumbent, therefore, on the insurance company to make policies as clear as possible. This is one of the reasons that insurance policies can seem so complicated. While this might seem counterintuitive, insurance companies have to make sure that an insured's lawyers can't poke holes in the insurance policy the way it was written. Insurance policies also result in an exchange of unequal amount. Remember that the consideration in insurance is the premium for the promise to pay. Tangible amounts will almost always be unequal. In other words, the dollars exchanged will ultimately be unequal. This is also known as aleatory. In Armin 205, we discussed that this meant the contract was aleatory. This is because the premium that you pay, while it's an estimate of future losses, it's based on the average over a large number of insureds. And as we've studied, insureds aren't going to have the same loss. It would be very unusual for an insured to have the average loss. Insurance policies are also conditional. The insurer is obligated to pay losses only if the insured fulfills certain conditions. This is one of the few aspects of an insurance policy that primarily protects the insurance company. There is an entire condition section in a policy. It's things like taking reasonable steps to ensure that no additional loss occurs to damaged property, like putting out a fire promptly and giving prompt notice of loss. This also prevents moral and morale hazard. Insurers frequently waive some conditions in practice. For example, they might waive the requirement that there be an inspection. If the insurer reasonably believes that the loss has occurred, they might waive the inspection to save some money. Also, insurance contracts are non-transferable. In other words, they are personal contracts between the insured and the insurance company. This means that an insurance policy is not automatically transferred with the sale of property and the liability it is insuring. So, for example, if you sell a home, the new homeowner can't acquire the insurance policy already associated with that property. On the other hand, an insurance policy actually can be sold to another insurance company. In other words, be transferred from one insurance company to another. The insured has to be notified about this transfer, but they don't have to agree to it. If an insured does not agree to the transfer, they could simply cancel the policy at any time. Now let's talk about approaches to insurance policy structure. We're going to look at two different ways that an insurance policy can be structured and two different forms of an insurance policy. So let's start with self-contained versus modular policies. First, a self-contained policy. This contains all of the provisions needed to make up a complete policy. It's most appropriate for insuring loss exposures that are similar among many insureds, such as personal exposures. Examples are personal auto and the business owner's policy. Then there's a modular policy, which can be either monoline, covering only a single line of business or line of exposure, or package policies that, for example, would cover both property and liability. They are created by combining a set of coverage forms, cause of loss forms, and conditions. These are, of course, more common in larger business policies for commercial exposures. A well-designed modular form that is combined as a package policy will result in fewer coverage gaps and overlaps, consistent use of terminology, fewer forms to meet a wide range of needs, simplification in underwriting, reduced adverse selection, and package discounts for the insured. Now let's look at pre-printed versus manuscript forms. Most forms are pre-printed. They're developed to meet the needs of many different insureds. These are contracts of adhesion and are easier to interpret because they usually have a history or a precedence to follow. Then there are manuscript forms. These are custom forms that are developed for one specific insured or a small group of insureds with unique needs. Sometimes these are actually developed by the insured, or at least partly by the insured. Therefore, they're negotiated, and therefore the contract of adhesion rules don't apply. Now let's discuss policy provisions. These are the different policy provisions in a typical insurance policy, beginning with declarations, which make the policy unique. It provides the information on that specific insured, and it provides a list of forms that are included in the policy. It is an outline of who or what is covered and where and when coverage applies. Remember that declarations are the only section that makes a pre-printed policy unique. Then there's definitions, which are words with special meanings in the policy. They may limit or expand coverage based on the definitions or terms. They define words that are used throughout the policy, making it shorter. Next is the insuring agreement, which is the promise to make payment. Then there are conditions, which we already discussed. They're qualifications on the promise to make a payment. If the insured does not abide by the conditions, the policy may not pay. And as I said, there may be exceptions. Next, there are exclusions, which are limitations on the promise to make a payment, which limit the insurer's payments based on excluded persons, places, things, or actions. And last are miscellaneous provisions, which are a wide variety of provisions that may alter the policy. These deal with the relationship between the insured and the insurer, or establish procedures for implementing the policy. This might include things like how a dispute would be handled in the policy. Lastly, let's discuss policy analysis. Insurance professionals should conduct a policy analysis on each new policy, not only to be able to answer questions, but most importantly, to make sure the coverage is appropriate for the insured's exposures. And a policy analysis should also be conducted after a loss occurs. First, pre-loss. This relies on a scenario analysis. The primary source of information for insureds is past loss experience. The insurance company should also rely on information from the insurance producer, CSR, or other agency representative. Then in terms of post-loss analysis, insurance companies often use the DICE method to make certain there is no provision in the policy that precludes coverage by looking at each section of the policy in this order. First, the declaration section, the D. Does the declaration section, which identifies who the insured is and where, you ask, is coverage precluded? Then the insuring agreement, the I. Does the promise to pay cover this particular loss? Next, conditions. Did the insured meet all the conditions under the policy? And last, exclusions. Is there any exclusion in the policy that applies for this particular loss? And that's the end of our discussion of insurance policy analysis.